Hello, my name is Jason Houston, and today we'll be going over the Fukushima nuclear disaster that hit Japan. This is part of the Global Environmental Health Project and the class of 2019. These are the objectives that I'll be covering in today's presentation, and we'll be moving forward quickly with some insight and focusing on graphing data to represent the disaster. Here's a table of contents with the slides and the relevant information. Let's begin with a background of the earthquake that happened on March 11th, 2011, that led to the tsunami that struck Fukushima. It was over a level 9 magnitude earthquake. It was felt around the world. In fact, it was so strong it changed the gravitational tilt in the world. It caused no immediate damage to the nuclear facilities, but the tsunami that followed killed over 200,000 people and forced an evacuation of over 100,000 because the water swelled in and destroyed and overwhelmed the nuclear facilities. And as the Fukushima nuclear plant's cooling system failed, the electrical backup system was obliterated by the tsunami, radioactive material was leaked into the ocean, and all three major Fukushima cores melted. These breakdowns in its backup systems led to an explosion and system failure, and the radioactive nucleotides of cesium-134 and 137 have been found across the ocean, as far as California, Canada, and Hawaii. So to put it in perspective, the Tohoku earthquake was the strongest that has ever impacted Japan. In fact, Japan is very susceptible to earthquakes and these types of disasters. Just looking at its history over time, Japan has had many, almost 10 earthquakes that are magnitude 8 or above. This region is impacted, and the reason why is because it is surrounded by all these tectonic plates. Here we can see the epicenter of where the earthquake happened that eventually hit Fukushima, but this is really just stuck in between all of different tectonic plates, and really just not great. So Japan has been able to adapt its infrastructure and its culture around these incidents. Here we have a breakdown and a chart over the different types of earthquakes that are major that have impacted Japan. I think it's funny because just because it's not the strongest, it doesn't mean it's the deadliest. And vice versa. In fact, the magnitude of the 7.9, the Great Kanto earthquake, caused the most amount of deaths. The earthquake was so strong in the fact that it was spread out over 10 minutes. Even though we have the Tohoku earthquake that resulted in an unfortunate 29,000 deaths, it's nowhere close in comparison. Over the years, Japan has experienced many different earthquakes, and they've been blamed and attributed to many different things. The Ansei Nanki earthquake happened in 1854, actually was blamed on a giant catfish that was angry with the island. So this image is kind of like a classic when evaluating what happened in Japan in the Fukushima outbreak. Is the nuclear energy faced a big backlash after the event, and everyone was speaking about how radiation was damaging and spreading across the world. And while it did spread, you have to look at this concentration as in centimeters. And when evaluated for health risk and health disparities, the concentration is safe enough to where no effects were really picked up. They were only concerned about the major effects that are close to Japan, where the outbreak and destruction of the nuclear plant happened. This is a nifty graphic that I found that shows the spread over time. We have been finding isotopes of the cesium for many years afterwards. In fact, Japan's still coping with the cleanup, but this can show how the currents eventually helped spread the nuclear waste and radioactive material across the planet. So, Tohoku earthquake, which was responsible for the Fukushima disaster, was actually the fourth strongest earthquake that happened. in the world, according to measure. You can see it right here in comparison to other major earthquakes that have been listed in the planet. So cleanup is still ongoing. As I mentioned earlier, this is the most economically damaging disaster that has ever happened. There was political backlash against nuclear energy. There was hyped fear of radioactive contamination, and there's impacts for energy industry. How do we move forward in evaluating whether it's worth it in clean air, whether emissions are a risk, and what energy sources are going to be best in the future? So we're actually going to look at this because the International Nuclear Event Scale has a measurement for major nuclear disasters. In fact, only 3 on its scale of 1 through 7 have happened that are catastrophically bad. Fukushima was one of them, but if you look at the overall number of nuclear disasters per decade, it's not that high. It happened and peaked in the 2000s, and during this time we saw a backlash against nuclear energy. Well, is nuclear energy efficient? For not having carbon emissions, it's right on the line with the coal fire and high pressure coal fire. It has its pros in the fact that it helps with climate change, but it also emits nuclear waste, which is very hard to deal with. Here we see how the world gets its energy. The majority of the world gets its energy from coal. Only about 10% gets its energy from nuclear, but I suspect we'll see an increase in solar, wind, and hydro because renewable energies are dropping in price significantly. So to summarize, is nuclear energy worth it when discussing a disaster? Well, the nuclear waste produced by plants is very hard to get rid of. Disasters are, in retrospect, really far in between. The energy output matches the efficiency of other standards, but is better for the climate. I do see the biggest threat to nuclear energy actually being the drop in cost of clean energy and renewable energy and how that plays into climate change, especially when you look at it from an economic standpoint and the associated fears and misinformation spread that happens with nuclear energy. It's important to learn and adapt from the disaster that happened in Fukushima, and it's important to learn and assess how our energy needs should be met. Thank you so much for joining me on this quick presentation and summary of nuclear energy in Fukushima. References and have a wonderful day.